You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast. To gird up is an ancient way of preparing oneself for hard work or a battle ahead. Our work is to reclaim masculinity in the modern world and to live out our calling as men of God. Here you will find a community of believers working hard to become the men that God created us to be. Now it's time to roll up your sleeves and let's get to work. All right, we got Mr. Castenzio Venegas with us today. What's up, Castenzio?
How you doing? Thank you for having me.
Does Castenzio... Sorry, I totally jumped in on you there. Does Castenzio like mean... So is that Italian? Does that mean something? Or is it just like one of those names where mom was like, that sounds awesome?
Yeah, it's a good question. First off, let me say this. As a non-narcissist, I love my name, Castenzio. And here's why, because nobody else has the name.
There you go.
But here's the thing. So I'm half Italian, half Mexican, right? When I spent a time in Italy, to teach English as a second language, before that time, I always thought, my name is Castenzio is Italian. Everybody who asked me, hey, what is that? I'm like, what's it? It's got to be Italian. My last name is Venegas. My dad's Mexican, right? So that's Mexican, Spanish. And then my first, it's Italian. And so when I got to Italy, I'm like, hey, my first name's Italian. And she looked, my house mom, she looked at me, Paola. She was like, I don't know any Castenzios, and I've been all over Italy. And I'm like, interesting. She said, yeah, I've heard. And she gave me a variation of other names. So comes to find out, it's not actually a true, if you will, Italian, but it has Latin roots, right? So it's a Latin-based name, which Spanish is Latin, French, right? Italian, Latin. But my mom got it, I believe, and I can never get the full story out of her. She got it from, I think, a distant relative that had a similar name and said, I want to name him Castenzio. So, but you Google it, I don't think you find any other. That's may awesome. Now, I don't know, but yeah.
There are a couple other Charles Ungemachs in the world.
Are there really?
Do you know what Ungemach means?
Great. No, what is it?
It means like irksome or bothersome.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like annoying. Yeah.
We all have that side to it,
exactly. My dad always makes the joke, kind of makes you wonder what your ancestors were like, right? some weird, messy family history in there somewhere if you go back far enough.
Speaking of family history, have you ever taken the DNA test?
The DNA test? Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. Well, and the crazy thing, because my family, like generations back, came from the northern part of Germany.
Okay.
And so the same like origin of the marauders who sacked Rome, and then also who burned like Saxony. So you get like when you don't get German when it comes up, you get all these other like things because generation because 1,000 years ago our ancestors were and so then you have like family in quotation marks relatives, blood relatives all over the place in Europe because the barbarians, there we go. The barbarians were all over Europe too, so it's kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I did my results. I was so nervous because when I sent them in, all my life I was like half and half. Like it's just been easy to be like, hey, if somebody asked me, what are you? What's your ethnicity? And I get that a lot, but in part because the way I look, and also because of how I talk, right? So I've always been easy to say Italian and Mexican, but then I'm like, that was my identity, right? That was my identity. So when I was waiting for the several weeks, I forget how long it take to come back, I was like, what if this doesn't say what I've always believed? Like it's going to rock my world. And so I didn't open it for the first few days when I got it back. But when I did get it back, it comes to find out that I came to find out that when I have a twin brother, obviously, right? So just because you're a brother and sister or a twin, right? You don't necessarily have, this is alleged, so I don't know if this is wrong. You can shoot me like this. That you don't actually take on the same exact DNA ratio. So we can both be Italian and Mexican, but I might be.
And you're identical twins, right?
We're fraternal, actually.
Fraternal, okay.
Yeah. Which I think is just split eggs, right? Oh my gosh.
Identical twins would be split eggs.
Okay.
Fraternal would be like two different fertilized eggs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're fraternal. And so he might have like 55% Italian. I might have like 50, right? But because we don't take on the same. So anyways, when I got it back, I was struggling with that because I didn't know that. But so I'm Southern Italian, 60%. And then the rest of it is just like this mix of what you would think is the makeup of Spanish or Mexican rather.
Right,
so it's like there's Mexico, there's Aguascalientes in Mexico, there's Texas in there. And then there's like a myriad of other ethnicity denominations. So there's Black is in there, African, right, is in there, European, Spanish is in there. And so I joke now. I'm like, when somebody asks me, what's your ethnicity? I'm like, well, technically I can say I'm Puerto Rican because I have European, Spanish, Black, and whatever else, right? So
we just got everything mixed in here. Yeah.
Yeah. But small percentage of that. But yeah. So the name actually, but to go back to the name, there was this, I think you used to get these at the state fair, but I got this, I don't know what you call it, a card with like your name on it, and then it had like a Bible verse to it. And so it was a Psalms verse, and this was.
And they had Castenzio, or you had to get it made?
I think you had to get it made. I don't know exactly the origin of this, but I know that like what I assumed was it had defined what the name meant biblically, so it was really interesting because I didn't grow up Christian. And when I got when I had the card, I still have it, and I wish I had the Psalms memorized, but the scripture, it would be so cool if I had it memorized right now. I can say it, but I don't. But essentially, it's like forever I will praise the nations and give God all the glory, right? So that's always stuck to me, even when I wasn't, walking with Jesus, right? Like it's been interesting because I often reflect, not every day, I wish, but like, is what I'm doing giving God the glory,
Yeah, no, I'm a nerd about like names and ancestry, because like it speaks so much meaning into who we are and what we become, and if you can kind of attach who you are now to what where you've come from,
right,
it like just even more meaning. But Charles means strong and manly, and then Edward is like a king, so kingly, so then for 7 generations, something like that. All the men in my family have either been Charles Edward or Edward Charles. So my dad is Edward Charles III. So then someday when I got a little kid running around, we'll probably name him Charles Edward, but you're not going to call him after me. Like, we'll call him after Grandpa, because Grandpa's the shoulders we stand on.
There
right?
You go.
So
isn't that interesting? Because like biblically, names meant so much, and in fact shaped the very essence of who you were. And so when I hear you say Charlie means manly, right?
Yeah,
it's like that. I'm like, yeah, and king, like you're this in a good way, right? Like this alpha male, right? That's who you are. That's who God made you, right?
Right. Well, and you said, and again, to take it like through the generations back, right? Yeah. And you see I love this term that I heard. I don't even remember where I heard it. It was years ago. I heard this idea of being the transitional figure in your family.
Wow.
So for in each generation as well. So if you go like generations back, like this classic story of you go 4 generations back, and he's a World War I veteran who struggles with, before they had really a grip on what PTSD is. Like that's really what it was, and crazy alcoholism and all kind of that kind of stuff. And then a strong woman who really stood by his side and got him right, which is also awesome. Shout out to the long dead Barbara Ungemach. Yes. But so then my grandfather, took it a step in the next direction. He's a public servant for his entire life and was an excellent father. And then my dad, is a public minister. And then like it logically makes sense to see where I am then. Yeah. But then also like picking up my part in the story and saying, let's carry this forth. And then starting the next generation, carrying it forth again.
That's good.
I love it. And that name, that idea of like, when everything's heading in the wrong direction, to put your foot down and say, no, this isn't going to be the story of my family. Yeah. And heading back into it. Can you think of anything more kingly than that?
Man, that's awesome. Yeah. That's really good. Your part in the story, that really sits well with me. And when I think about mine, as you say that, I think about my name. We don't have this tradition of growing up in the faith, in the walk, So when I think about that scripture that was attributed to my name on this card that was laminated, right? I think like it's interesting, and how much I feel favored, and how blessed I feel that God would choose us, right? Like, why me, and that's what he did for everybody in the cross, right? Like you, everybody. And so I think like there that like really sits well with this. I will give God the glory, because we're supposed to be set apart. And so how has he set me apart within my family tree? And what does that mean for the rest? What does that mean for the trajectory of my future, my family, where we go,
Yeah.
So it's good. It's good stuff, man. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Well, and on the flip side, to keep that going in that direction, you think about Paul when he's talking, I think it's in Corinthians or Ephesians, where he's talking about, like, if anybody could brag, it's me, right? I come from the best heritage, the best family line. I've done all the right Jewish things. I've followed all the laws and everything. Like, my family can't say that.
Right.
You go back a few generations and it's a mess.
Right.
You know, like my family can't say that, and they made something of it anyway. And now, like I can't think of a greater honor than being an Ungavak, right?
That's
and
awesome.
so, like understanding the work and sacrifices they put in, but then also understanding my place in the picture and saying we could go back there if you don't walk the line too, and even further saying like the Lord hasn't chosen me because I'm some great, this, that, or whatever. He's used broken men for generations to shape me into who I am.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you take up the mantle, right? Like think about Elisha and Elijah. So like, the mantle is yours. And I that's interesting because I've always asked for a double portion. And I've always been in the mindset of like, because I don't have anybody in my family to say and point back to like, look at this great woman or man of faith, right? But people that have come into my life since I've started to walk in this is like either great ministers or pastors or people who just have this amazing relationship with Jesus. And I thought like, man, the anointing that's on their life, the favor that's on their life, not for vain purposes, but for just effectiveness and use in the kingdom. I want double portion, right? Like I want double portion of that. And you have this, you carry this mantle, and like and so like the scripture of Ephesians 3:20 comes to mind always, like we are able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think, according to, and it's according to what God's his power, what he purposed us to do. So it's just powerful to think about that, man.
Yeah. Are you familiar with David Goggins at all?
No.
So you'd love David Goggins. He's right up your alley. He's super vulgar, but you're not
him.
super vulgar. I'm not saying that, but you're not usually, at least. Anyway, but he's a Navy SEAL, and his quick story coming through. Like he was abused as a child, and like his mom ran away from his dad, like all that kind of stuff. And then like at one point he weighed like 300 some pounds, and then he had to lose like 130 pounds in 3 months in order to be able to go off the SEAL training to begin with, and he had to do Hell Week 3 times and all that. And then eventually became a decorated SEAL, and at one point was like the recruiter who's like the face of the Navy SEAL community recruits and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so he's got a book that has come out, and he like does ultra marathons and all kinds of just does crazy stuff. Wow, yeah. And first of all, he talks all the time about like, he's got to keep pushing the limits, because if he doesn't, like that is what's holding him together, right? If he isn't thinking about the workout tomorrow or the next thing he has to run or the next like trip he has to take or whatever, then he's just like spiraling again, just like he did when he was young. But what I was getting at was he was talking about, I don't remember if he said it was a dream he had or if it was just like something like an image he had in his head, but he had this vision, he said, of dying, and ended up, at heaven's gates. Yeah. And St. Peter is like, welcoming people in, and he's got a list in front of him, and he goes like, oh yeah, David Goggins. And then if he hadn't done all the great things he's done, so St. Peter looks at him and says, like ultra runner, Navy SEAL, decorated combat veteran. You wrote a book, you're a motivational speaker. And he's saying, like if I hadn't had the strength to just like go out and do all this, I would have been like some 300-pound, 60-year-old couch potato who's going, that's not me. Like, that's not me. And the idea of St. Peter looking at him and saying, well, that's what you were supposed to be. Like, those are the good works that, to quote Hebrews, those are the good works that God had prepared in advance for you to do. And the idea of getting to heaven's gates and finding out there was something more, like God had something greater for you, and you just like, and whether or not that's doctrinal, I don't know. Like, I'm not saying that that's actually going to happen. I'm not saying that at all. I think when we get to heaven, it's going to be this blissful, awesome experience where God says,
indescribable.
Right. I don't think he's really going to be sitting up there going, well, you didn't check all the bullet points off, son. But like that idea of getting to the end of my life and knowing that I had accomplished all those things that the Lord had set out for me to do, right? That his plan in eternity was to say, hey, Charlie Ungavak, he might be kind of messed up dude, but he's going to check these things off the list. Right. Like, these are the great things he's going to do for my kingdom.
Man, that brings me great joy. I love that, because so I'll just share my greatest fear, and I'm really abashed in saying this, and I feel like I'm vulnerable to say this, but it's really not that. I'll just share it. So my biggest fear, and it connects to what you just said, is I'm afraid to be normal. I'm afraid to be average. And so I think about like what you just said, because it's almost like the reason why I'm saying that is because when I get to, just Judgment Day, I was like you said, like here was the potential. Here was what I had for you, not because of you're great, because you're broken. You need me. You're imperfect, but the potential that I have of what you can do through me, and those things aren't normal. Those things aren't average. You know what I mean? And so I think that like that's my fear. Like if we become, and normal would have to be defined, right? But like you get what I'm saying. Like if we are operating as normal, average people, I think for me that means like we're not doing the fullness of what God has purposed us to do. As men, as husbands, as leaders, as civil rights people, like as in our activists in our community, whatever it is, whatever God's purposed you to do in destiny, So I always think about that, man. Like I have to, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I haven't thought about that fear in a while, but I'm just like, man, am I normal today? I don't want to be normal today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, scripture says in Revelation, God says, if you're lukewarm, he's going to spit you out, right?
That's right.
Man, you'd rather be hot or cold, just spit you out. If you're going to be evil, just be wicked, man.
Right.
But don't be lukewarm. Don't be lukewarm.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
It's
So if you're afraid to be normal, to keep that train going, so you can't be above average at everything, right? Like if you're going to be an excellent bowler, you're probably going to be an average golfer, right? So like how do you pick out what you're going to be excellent at, like what you're going to pursue and really chase after? Yeah. I mean, there's kind of the obvious like checklist ones, like being a husband, community member, church member, that kind of stuff. But how then, like, so you're an educator, and like you keep an excellent physical shape. So how do you pick what stuff you choose to throw all that energy into?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me start with the place of like vision, because I think so normal, right? Like when I think about opposing that, fighting against that, I think it starts with a vision, or in other words, going back to what God has promised. And I think if we can be honest with ourselves, every single one of us, wherever we're at in our relationship with Jesus, we can point back to something. We're like, yes, and we're true to ourselves. God's promised me this, because I think that aligns with how he's designed us as individual men or women, right? But like how he's designed us. So like he's gifted you specifically in this area of like men in leadership with respect to faith. And so you're doing it now, right? And you'll do it full time soon. And so not prophetic, maybe prophetic. But so what I'm saying is like, so God spoke to me he spoke to me, this was 2011 in January. I think I might have shared this, but I'll share it again. And he gave me, I was at a really low point, and he gave me, I wouldn't say vision in terms of a picture, but I was in prayer, and I was just like, okay, I was in my transition to Italy. So I had my master's degree, just to paint a picture of context. I had my master's degree in education. I was teaching full time. I had already taught for 3 years. And so when I got back from Arizona and came to Wisconsin, I was in this position of like getting ready to transition to Italy and go teach abroad, because that was my next milestone in education. Well, the timeline didn't match up to what I had said, right? Like I was supposed to be in Italy, and so it was in January, and I was supposed to be gone like August, September, whatever. And it was in January. I was still in Wisconsin, back in Racine, and I'm like, God, okay, I don't understand. Like I know I prayed about this, right? Like you said, this is what you want me to do, but I'm not there yet. So then I was praying, and then God gave me just a word, and it was in prayer, just came to me, and so I wrote it down. It was like God, He said, one day. By 2015, you will lead, direct, and operate a network. Lead, and direct, operate a network of high-performance schools by 2015. I was 2011 when I wrote that down. And so what's so crazy is, like, let's just fast forward. You know some of the journey, right? But, like, what was crazy about that is that I wrote it down. I didn't tell anybody because it was stupid to say it out loud, right? But it was a promise that He gave me. And so, and He had already, like rocked my world, because I was a double major in business and marketing, almost a minor in communications. But yet, when I graduated college, I then went to Teach for America, right? So I went to teach. And then when I went to Phoenix, that's when I had an encounter with Jesus. And I'm like, wow, So I was on this education track for 3 years, got my master's. These are things that I'm doing that operates in my strength, or in other words, what God had called me to do, right? And then when I knew him and was growing with him, then he gave me a word. And so I'm like, okay, how do I know this is not normal, right? You don't just go to Italy for no reason. Like you go because God called you, right? And when you come back, he gave me this thing that's not normal, right? You don't even have experience to lead. You don't even have, how are you going to open a school? You have no idea about opening a school, right? There's so much to that, right? Not normal. But I believe God gave it to me. And then, so all of the pieces that worked out in between that year, 2011, and literally in October, it was like around the winter, or maybe it was the fall of 2014, when Chris DeBoer came to me and said, hey, the president of Open Sky Education, he wants to know if you would be willing to open and lead our Racine school in 2015-2016 school year. And then Krista didn't know that about me. So I said, Krista, I'm loyal. I love Center for Urban Teaching. I'm loyal to what you brought me on the team to do. But there's 1% that you don't understand that I need to pray about. Because I forgot about it for a moment. It was always in the recess of mine, but I knew I had to do it. I knew God spoke it to me, rather. And so that for me was not normal. I didn't set out to do this principalship, open a school, to go back to my community, but God gave me that promise. And so it's up to us then to be like, okay, I don't think I'm good in this area. I don't think I can do well in this area, but I know God has purposed me to do it. So this is the next step. So,
and I think that's a biblical thing, You look at Gideon, the calling of Gideon. He's hiding and he's threshing grain in the middle of the night, and God comes to him and says, "The Lord be with you, mighty warrior." And he goes, "You talking to me? Like, who are you talking
Exactly,
to, right?"
yeah.
And Moses says no like 5 times, and finally God gets ticked off and goes, "Fine, I'll give you Aaron."
That's good.
Right? Like, you just see these again and again.
Yeah.
Of like men who go like, no, like Saul literally, like, at his own coronation, Saul is hiding in the back and doesn't want to come to the front at his own coronation.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Men who are not equipped, men who don't have opportunity, men who never dreamed of it.
Right.
And God says, "No, you're the guy I got. You're the guy I got for this."
It's good that you read that. So Saul, before he came Paul, for me was just like, it was so, that spoke to me when I started this journey. Because when the Lord, on his road to Damascus, when the Lord blinded him, struck him blind, I can boil it down, and we can fact check this scripture, but Paul's response was in 2 questions, or actually 2 statements, rather. No, there were 2 questions, rather. And the 2 questions he said when he got struck blind, he was persecuting Christians before this. You know the story, right? But when he was on the road to Damascus, he got struck blind, and he said, "Who art thou, Lord?" Number 1. In other words, for me, that was like, God, I know you're my Lord and Savior. I know that you call me to be a part of this family. Here's how here's what to do. And then the second question is, what will you have me to do? And so for me, I'm like, okay, my journey with Jesus, started more or less in 2007. And so it was like, yes, I know what you did. I know it. I know the price that you paid. I know the remission of sins. I know the forgiveness, right? I know the resurrection. And then what will you have me to do? And so I think those 2 questions, like, man, that spoke to me ever since. Like, okay, God, next step of the life, not every single step of the way, what will you have me to do? And I think that for me is not living normal. That's living above average. And so that requires a ton of stuff, right? Us to be in prayer, us to be continuously devoted to what he's calling us to do,
Yeah. So you're one of those individuals who's just like insanely disciplined and regimented about what you're going after, right? Or at least you portray the image. But like you get after it, and you even collect data on it, and you really get after it when you set your mind to something.
Sure. Yeah.
So what's behind that?
Yeah.
Why, because a lot of people are like, yeah, I'll run a marathon, and they run a marathon, but you don't run a marathon, you win a marathon, right?
Right.
You're that kind of guy. So what's behind that? Like, what's going on inside your head that's what you choose to? I love it.
Yeah.
I wish I could emulate it a little bit better. So what does that drive come from?
Yeah, I think that. So I mentioned this earlier. I think before we turn on the tape, that I have a twin, right? So I'm a minute older than my brother, and I feel like I came into this world feet first. Literally, my mom had to have a cesarean section because I was gonna be choked to death, right? Because I was coming out feet first, right? And so the way I came into this world
Didn't
was
want to wait.
right. And so as a result, my brother was born a minute later because the doctor had cut her open. So for me, I came into this world fighting, and I feel like any one of us. It's almost like what I love about this is, Jaime Escalante said this to his students. He was a Latino teacher teaching in California back, I forget when. And he said we have marks against us, the color of our skin and our name. And so he's speaking to kids, who are Latino or Black, right? And so you have students there's a disadvantage, right? People are against you because of the way you look and because of your name, and they're going to judge you. And so I think in this world, I feel like I had some of that sense, right? Like, because I've always had this identity crisis where it's like, well, I'm Italian and Mexican. And so I went to high school where we had 2,000 students, right? So there was cliques everywhere. I was friends with Gothics. I was in the prep clique. I was an athlete. I was the gang members, the Vice Lords and GDs. We shake up with them in the hallway. So like I knew every single gamut of people, but I never felt like I belonged, right? So I'm painting this picture because I'm saying I've never felt like the identity crisis was very real. So I've always felt like I've had to fight this battle, right? So that's the first part. The second part of this is that I'm a twin. And so because of that, like, everything is a competition. Everything, and especially as a man, I feel like everything is a competition. Oh, you can do that, I can do that better, right? Like, it's always been like that in a loving way, because I love my brother and I want him to do well too. And so there's that mixture in this. And then there's this other belief, and I don't know where I developed this mindset. I'm not sure. But this mindset, I've always been of the belief of like, if you can do it, anyone else, if you can do it, I can too. Why can't I? Like, it's like if we know when Kennedy said, like, one day we will go to the moon, we're gonna figure this out, and we went to the moon, right? Like, if we can go to the moon, we can do anything, right? And the scripturally says, with God all things are possible, right? So there's that mentality. It's like, if you believe, and it's not this prosperity gospel, like, if I believe it, I'll receive it, right? But it's not that. It's just like you got to work hard for it, right? And then there's this final thing of like, I feel like I'm a mama's boy, and my mom is amazing. My mom I attribute my mom to this. The first time I ever had a job was when I was 13, and it was a paper carrier. I was a paper boy. And so my mom helped me get that job. For whatever reason, I don't know why that was the position, but because I think it was the earliest, like, at that age, that was like one of the only jobs, That paper route job I had 3 paper routes. And my mom would take me every morning because there were 3 routes altogether. And so it wasn't everything. I couldn't walk the route or run the route. Like, it was miles upon miles. So She had to take me in certain distances, right? So she took me she was faithful in this. Took me every single day, every single morning. We'd get up at 5, maybe 4 or something sometimes. And I would deliver paper for like 3 years. That discipline, man, that was instrumental for me. So as a result, I'm a morning person. I get up at 4:30 every single day. As a result of that, like, I have joy. My mom was always laughing and smiling in the morning, always having a conversation, but we were always with cracky jokes. And it also taught me this ethic of hard work. I'm like, man, if you want this paycheck that I received every month, it was around like $300 some dollars every month rather, that I would receive. Like, man, like, that happened because of my daily 5 o'clock, get up, paper route. Yeah. And I'm like, man, that for me, that paid off. Like, hard work pays off. Kip Schools quotes that, right? But like, that was real for me. You know what I mean? So like, I've learned from very on, like, you have to embrace struggle. You have to struggle. It doesn't feel good to wake up early, but you have to embrace struggle to make progress. And so for me, that hard work discipline has always stuck with me. So it's just been a thing, man, like, ever since,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember my grandpa. I was working for my grandpa at the shop, and so my family's John Deere dealers, so my mom's side of the family, and walking around the shop, and I'd get my teenager, that slow walk going, drag your heels on the ground, and he'd be biting, like, nipping on my heels, going, walk with a purpose, walk like you're selling something. Like,
I love that.
Fine, and I hated it.
Yeah.
And now like when people are putzing, it's like we got work to do.
Right.
Like we're here for a reason.
Right. That's right.
You know, I loved that. Like I don't think they do it anymore. They didn't do it when I was there, but I loved when we first started doing tours, and we'd go through St. Marcus every morning. They'd say the Be Strong poem.
Yeah.
And the first verse is, we are not here to play, to dream, or to drift. We have hard work to do and loads to lift.
Yeah.
Shall not the struggle face it. 'Tis God's gift.
Hey,
it's just like we got stuff to do, man.
Right.
Like we're not here to, like we're here for a reason. We got work to do.
Yep, that's
so,
right.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And if you don't have that sense of purpose, you got to find it.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah.
When just in thinking about education, man, I think this is so important. I think, I don't know why it is. Maybe it's a human condition, but I often find kids, irrespective of whatever ethnicity, whatever socioeconomic status, kids, I think, gravitate towards like what's easy, no matter what it is, whether it's work, whether it's play, sports, whatever it is. Like, and as educators, man, like, it's more than academics. And I think one of the things for us as educators is so, I think is one of the most important things to teach our kids is to teach them that struggle is one of the only ways to grow. Like, you have to struggle. You have to embrace the struggle. And you think about any, like, what we would deem successful person, you can look at their life and you can point back to the moment, a defining moment, or a moment that they can attribute to their growth as a moment of struggle, And so think about this, like when we think about character development too, like with our character program, we always talk about what defines character. So in other words, ask yourself the question, just thinking about it, what helped you define your character? And when people think about that, they'll answer many questions like, it was a mentor, right? It was somebody instrumental in my life, or it was a defining moment where you went rock bottom, right? And you learned a lesson, hopefully, right? and like those are like that's in the Bible even says, right? Like we're not promised no struggle. Jesus even says, take upon my yoke.
So we're
my
promised
burden.
exactly the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Like he says, my yoke is light. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. There's a yoke and burden though, And so I think that like we just have to embrace that. And that scripture is beautiful because it's like what Paul talks about, when I'm weak, I'm strong. So we have to admit this weakness. We have to embrace this struggle, but that's where God can intervene and do the work. But yeah, man, like this teaching our kids, this teaching ourselves that like, and I was just reading this Maxwell book lately. I read, part of the daily discipline, by the way, I set goals, right? Like every year, my goal is to read 32 books this year. Every single year I set it. I'm at 9 right now. I'm about to finish 9 rather. So I'll be on track. That's 3 a month since the beginning of the year. But I'm reading Maxwell book right now, and I'm on this chapter about like he's talking about I think the chapter's around like problem solving. But he makes this quote or this statement rather, it's about like difficult life. And he said it was powerful to me because he said it's interesting with people because people often think they're confused because life is difficult. But he said if you can accept the fact that life is difficult and it will be difficult, life will no longer be difficult.
Yeah.
Because you welcome it, it's gonna come, right? And not that the difficulty goes away, but it's like you're not surprised by it, Like life has this, man. That's just what it is,
Yeah. There's a scene in Band of Brothers where I don't remember what the battle is, but there's a scene where there's a guy, one of the soldiers is sitting in a foxhole and he can't pull the trigger, right? And like he's just so shell shocked, like there's nothing. He can't do anything. And at one point he's even like struck blind, and an officer comes up to him and says, like, you still think you're gonna make it out of this, right? Like you still think there's a happy ending here. The only like the best soldiers are the soldiers who like when the battle starts, they say, all right, I'm already dead. So what can I do between now and then? What can I do for my country? What can I do for my brothers between now and then?
That's good.
And like same thing applies to life. Like if you're trying to get out alive, you're gonna fail.
Yeah.
Right. And so understanding that and saying this is the end.
Yeah.
And even going further than that, if for me to live as Christ and to die as gain, then
That's
like go ahead. It's like physically harm me, sure.
Right.
Bring me a couple hours closer to my Heavenly Father, right?
Right.
Or, cause me some stress and some difficulty, just gonna bring me closer to my Heavenly Father. And so understanding that and saying like, what is there if that's true, then why would I live like a safe and quiet and boring life?
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. And I think about it physically too, right? Like the way God made our bodies. You work out, obviously, right? And so like the way to build muscle is to break it down.
Yeah.
You have to go through the pain of lifting the weights, right? The eccentric, concentric movement, because you're breaking apart the muscle fibers, because then when they build back up, they're stronger, they're bigger. And so that God created our bodies, right? Like that alone is like, it's evident in that. It's evident in our DNA. And so it's like, this is life. And, I think, the one thing I was going to say about that too is like this, the way that, when atrophy sets in is because when we're inactive, So I think active in the spiritual sense and active in the physical sense. Like we have to, like Paul said, it's great gain to have physical, to be competition, right? Like to have physical, but like the race that's before us, this physical race, like we have to be active. The spiritual realm is all around us. And so, that's why I think like it's important to like open up and honest with our failures and mistakes, because there's liberty in that, and as the Bible says, like that you confess your faults one to another, because there's healing in that. Because we can't. I think the sin's power lies in secrecy. So that when we keep sin secret, we're not able to confess one to another, and there's liberty and freedom and healing in that. But when we do, it's not because we're weak or vulnerable, because we are actually, right? But rather because like God knows the design of like struggle is progress. The design of like weakness is grace. The design of like you go through hardship, but I'm gonna make it through, and like this is the way it is, So it's an attitude and perspective, man. Like I love your question, the initial question you asked, because like it's like you discipline when you realize that like no matter what you face or comes your way, you're going to persevere and have grit because like you have purpose and vision for it, and you know those things are going to come.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So,
awesome.
Yeah, it's good, man.
So you talk about the idea that you have to be continually, confessing and sharing, with each other.
That's hard though.
What does that look like for you?
That's hard, man. I fail at this. Because I'm a private person. Yeah. I think I'm a private person. My wife is amazing.
Yeah, myself as well.
Yeah. My wife Tiffany, she's amazing. She, we have completely different backgrounds. So she'll often tell me, I need you to talk. I need you to share. Like, I need you to open up. Two things with this. Number one is like, I have a difficult time of tagging up feeling and behavior, right? The second thing is like, it's just, it's hard to share struggles. Yeah. It's hard to share that. So I think as men though, this platform is one of them, right? But I think as men though, like it's connecting with guys who understand. And I think we all have a different story, I love what you said before. Like you talked about like to do like men's ministry well, like you be like you, right? Or you got to be like this drug dealer who's completely flipped, right? Because God snatched him up. And so I think, but that the value in that is like, man, find people who are like you, that understand you, right? Like that that you can share with them anything, and then that they're not going to judge you for it because they get it, they understand it. They're men too. So for me, it's finding that core group of people. The reason why CrossFit is so powerful, because you have group accountability.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. Yeah.
Right? Like it's my brother's a CrossFit training certified, and the reason why it's so powerful because like you got people, they're cheering you on, like the right form, hopefully, right? But like
that's exactly the issue with CrossFit.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my one niche. I love CrossFit people. So if you're listening to CrossFit, just make sure you do the right form. But no, but really, like you encourage each other because it's about like group accountability. And so for me though, like that group accountability, you got to find that group, man. And there has to be people you can feel comfortable opening up with. And there has to be a certain point of like where you realize like I'm comfortable with these people, and now I got to do the hard part and open up, you know? So for me, I got this, social media. There's the app Marco Polo, if you're familiar, Marco Polo video chats, right?
Okay.
And so I'm on Marco Polo with video chats because two of my friends, Ivy and Justin, they're in Arizona. And so the way that we communicate, the way that we have done the last legit 2 years in September, for sure every week. It was in the beginning, it was like every single day, but it's multiple times a week. We check in with each other through Marco Polo, and we just share struggles. We share real stuff. We share things that we, ideally disclose everything to our wives, but when we struggle to share those things, we share that and we open up, because we not only minister to one another, right? We pray for one another, but we also say like, hey, snap out of it. Like, what's your struggle? Like, what did you struggle with today? What did you struggle with this past week? I'm going to share it, because I know they're not going to judge me and chastise me for it, but they're going to encourage me, and they're going to call me out too, but you got to find that group of people. And so it's finding that, like, and my brother has a group of people, of men that get together every Friday. I love them, and they're great. And I told them this face to face too, but I'm like, I can hang out with you guys, but this isn't my group,
Right.
It's not my group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think to do that is like, it takes courage, but you have to find the right group of people, of men, but you have to do it. Like you just have to do it, and you have to open up. And it's so liberating, because, somebody goes first. At a certain point, somebody goes first. And my group of 3 people is my triad. They have Justin, Ivory, and me. Ivory always goes first, and Ivory will share. And I'm like, man, I'm so glad you said that, because I'm struggling with that too. I understand what you're saying, and it's great. We're crying on here, right? Like, we're crying. We see each other in the video chat, so it's powerful, because it's more intimate than like a text message or a phone call, And we're crying on here. We're ministering to each other, but it's freeing, and the Bible verifies this, right? Like, when you confess your faults to one another. So I think that's huge, man. That's not the perfect way. That's how I do it, though.
Yeah. No, I got 2 buddies who also, because they're college buddies, so they end up all over the country, right?
Yeah,
so,
of course.
But the same thing we don't do it all together. But like, once I got one conversation scheduled, earlier in the week, the other one every Friday morning. And like, there's even like the other teachers at school, like, no, on Friday morning I'll be walking in with the phone in my ear.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's
Yes.
what's going on, is we're having that conversation.
Man,
and like you said, like, there's nothing hidden. And we know each other's pet sins too.
Yeah.
So then every once in a while you push farther, like, okay, yeah, we got that out of the way. Like, what else is going on? Like, that's not the only struggle you've got. What other ones are going on?
That's good.
The thing I struggle with is, especially since like this isn't where I grew up, and like we bounced around so much as kids. Like, we were different parts of the state and Midwest as kids, and then I went to college in Minnesota, teach in Milwaukee, and like all that. I don't have any like childhood through adulthood friends, I don't have that kind of network. And so I've got I don't have any brothers by birth, so those are my brothers. Like, the interesting thing that I reflected on this a little bit. The interesting thing is my 2 best friends, who they are brothers to me. Like, I even introduce them as brothers when people meet them. They also have sisters and not brothers, and so we all like kind of connected that way. And like, that's really interesting to me, is that's kind of how it. Like, I haven't been able to develop, that kind of relationship with a guy that does have a brother, which is really interesting and really cool.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've struggled with is I've got those guys who are always a phone call away, right? And I can get a hold of them. And even if we don't get a hold, it's call twice and pick up if you can. If you can't pick up, we're going to get in touch as soon as possible.
Yes.
But I don't have that piece where there's a guy who's actively in my life, like where I see face to face in a couple of days a week, and who can call me out on my crap when I get there. Because even when you are on the phone and confessing, there is going to be something that you just like, selfish pride or whatever it is, or maybe you just miss it,
Yep.
And I know there's stuff I'm missing. And every once in a while I look around and I go like, how did we get here? Like, this is a pride point for me.
That's so
and
true.
how did we get here?
Yeah.
Like, there was my favorite way to compare it is right now I'm intermittent fasting, so I don't eat in the morning
Okay.
before I go to school. But
Yeah.
when I'm not, like when I'm trying to put weight on or trying to get stronger, I eat like 4 eggs and a bunch of sausage for breakfast every morning.
Okay.
And I like to cook them over easy. And
Yeah.
sometimes those yolks get caught in my mustache and beard, right? So I go walking into school, and I don't see it when I look in the mirror because it's still wet. But by the time I get to school, you've got like yellow egg yolk on
Oh
your
my God.
face, right? And I'll get to like 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'll look in the mirror and go, "What? How, 150 people have seen me this morning," and nobody was like, "Hey,
Nobody
dude,
said
you got something in your beard." They were all just like rolling on with it. Like, so first of all, do I look like this all the time? That it's just like normal, and they're like, "Hey, he's got food in his beard again." But then also, like, why doesn't somebody say something?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And I don't want my life to be like that, like
Yeah.
real life. You know? Like, I don't want to be like
Yeah.
cruising through life, and all of a sudden I have to notice that something's going wrong, that something's getting out of control, that things are getting deficient here or whatever.
Right.
I'm not going to notice it until it's detrimental.
Yeah.
Having somebody else and saying like, "Hey, dude, this is,"
Mm-hmm.
and I understand a spouse is that to some extent.
Sure.
Should probably get on that. But,
Sure.
but just having brothers around, that's one of the things that I struggle with.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's interesting because I think it's in Corinthians that talks about it has this comparison of how the word is like, the analogy of the word is like a mirror.
Yeah.
And so your analogy is perfect, right? Like it talks about, I don't see the imperfection, but when you look at me, you see it.
Yeah.
And if I were to look in the mirror, or in other words, if I were to reflect on what God has showed me, I would see it,
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think that like for me, I struggle with the same thing because, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard for me to take like behaviors or feelings, right? Like I'll know when, generally speaking, like when like, yes, this is off, but I won't necessarily be able to in the moment be like, yeah, I'm going on the wrong path, right? Like,
Right.
I think as men, we struggle with that, right?
Yeah.
Women, and I'm being general, by and large are like really good at that. Like they be like, hey, yeah, I see long term. This, you continue with this, it's a problem. So
Yeah.
so I think like I think like there's this continual like process for us to be like, how are we doing like this daily or weekly checkup? And I love when you send like a brother to check me out, because even on these Marco Polos that I have with men, it's like, or Ivory and Justin, what they'll do is, I always do this because I know they'll ask me. I say, I'm struggling, and I'll be like, hey, pray for me, and then I'll end the video chat. I'll say things before that, right? But I won't go into details. Like I'll just say I'm struggling, and they'll come back like, Stens, you just said you're struggling. Shut up and open up, right? Like it's like like share, right? And so I think that's I think it's so important, because for me sometimes I can't. It's hard to be reflective, man. Like I can see and analyze that person in this situation and these students and this staff, right? But like when it comes to ourselves, like I think sometimes we have a blind spot, for me at least, and so we need like good quality brothers in our life, irrespective of their blood or not, right? Like God designed us, a brother is born for adversity. And so in times of trouble, right? Like they're there. So like, I feel like that's biblical, right? It's like you need guys who are like in that time of struggle, you need somebody to be like, hey, this is real. I'm gonna call it out.
Yeah.
Work on it. And then, and I've always compared like a true friend as somebody like, you're out to eat, and let's say you're with a group of people and you got a booger in your nose.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And the friend will be like, dude, you got a booger, like turn to the side, like get it out. You know what I mean? Like you have somebody would call it out. Like everybody knows it. And so I feel like in leadership too, like leadership is like, everybody knows your weakness. Everybody knows it anyways. We have to be aware of ourselves and be like, hey, I'm gonna call it out. I know it's not enough to be like, oh, so I know I'm weak in this. Ha ha ha, I'm laughing off. But it's like, I know I'm weak, and here's how I'm working on it. You know, and that's the next step. Like call it out, get somebody to call it out for you, name it, and be like, okay, got it. Here's what I need to do to change it.
Right. And being vocal about that and saying like, this is what the next week is going to look like, or this is what the goal is, so that they have something to come back to and say like, well, dude, you said this,
That's
and it's integrity at that point.
It is, man. Something else I was thinking about too, like, and this is a struggle for me. I think it's a struggle I'll just be vulnerable for a moment. I think it's a struggle for me because, and this might sound like an excuse, because of personality though, but like we just have to be honest with ourselves about boundaries, you know, because like when we talk about all this connects, like you talked about discipline, and then now you're talking about like, now we're talking about like, how do you hold yourself accountable, and you know, to the struggles that you may have, right? Like, so boundaries is so important as men, man, aren't they?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
dating or not, married or not, like we talked earlier about, like, you know, a book that talks about this, right? But boundaries are so important because, I fully believe that we know our own boundaries, and we know where we need to draw the line.
In what context?
Yeah, relationship.
Okay.
Relationship. And I think boundaries, that I like that to define it. But I think in general, right, like you say, it apply to anything. But if we think about relationships, right?
Yeah.
Like relationships, married or not married, right? Like
Right.
boundaries are so important because nobody sets out to marry to be like, I'm gonna have infidelity, right? Nobody sets out to have, like, if you're you know, a God-fearing man and like you're dating somebody to marry, like you don't set out to be like, I'm gonna have sex with this woman before we get married, right? Maybe some, but like if you know like what the truth
Right,
says, like
yeah.
you want to have a pure relationship before you get married, so you put boundaries in place, and so the boundaries are there to guard against your weaknesses, and really your weaknesses are your flesh.
Yeah.
You know, when Paul talked about, I asked God to remove this thorn in my flesh 3 times, it didn't go away. So there are things in our life, man, in our flesh, and things in our area of weaknesses that are not going to go away. I fully believe that, right? And so it's like, what do we do to not necessarily mitigate that, but to work through that?
Yeah.
And I think in relationships, it's boundaries, man. It's boundaries, and we just have to be real with ourselves. Like for you know, for marriages, I think for my wife and I, like, it's like, I know my past. I shouldn't find myself alone with a woman one-on-one, even in a car ride, or even, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, no, absolutely.
And so it's that's a conviction that you have to ask God, right? Like, no matter what it is, if you're dating, it's like, okay, for me, I just shared with me, for me, it was like, I loved R&B music, right? So when I was dating, for me, a boundary did not look like this, meaning like, come over tonight, I'm going to put candles on, I'm going to put some R&B music. We're not going to talk about R. Kelly, but like, we're going to put R&B music, right? And then slow jams, we call it, right? And then like
it's just,
like,
you know,
that
see
sets
what
the
happens.
mood. Right.
Yeah,
Like
that line, you
right.
just erased that line and moved it about
right.
6 feet back.
And you can't say, okay, God, you know my heart. But then the Bible talks about flee from fornication. It doesn't say sit with fornication and resist. It says flee.
Yeah.
Flee means you go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like the boundary there is like, the way I got in this is like discipline, right? So we just have to recognize we have the flesh, right? We have areas of weakness as men. And so like the discipline of it is so important, because it's not necessarily, works don't save us, right? But the Bible does talk about like faith without works is dead. Like how do you exercise your faith? In other words, like God says there's $1 million treasure over there 3 miles. If I believe it, I would go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, you're gonna and if you're gonna drop everything to go
you
find
do
it.
Yeah, you go find it, right? You go find it, because that's the works part of it. Like, I didn't put it there, I didn't cause it to be there. It's there because God said it's there. God, He provided it, but I need to go and get it.
I'm also not gonna like drive past the lot and be like, well, I'm kind of late for work at my $10 an hour job, you know? Like, get out the car and go dig it up.
That's right. Yeah, you gotta work. So I think that like that there's this thing, like, man, we just have to be real with ourselves. That's what I'm saying, and all this, right? The key idea, you have to be real with yourself, and know your weaknesses. You know, because the enemy knows them.
Yeah. Well, and to tie that back around to purpose again, like we all have those moments and those times where, like, the best way I think in my mind to describe it is when you're itching for a fight, you know, we've all had those days where like you just want to get in a fight, but you don't want to be the guy that starts the fight, you know, like you're whether you're sitting in a bar and there's some guy annoying you and you're just like, man, say something to me, like just say something to me,
right.
Or like whatever it is, and but temptation's the same way. So there are times like no one can deny that there are times where you're scrolling through Instagram and you're like, just send me a little something,
right?
Send a little something my way. Like, I'm not looking for it, but I'm gonna go I'm gonna go hit search, and see what might
Yeah.
pop up right there. And,
Right.
and so that's where purpose comes in is
where
you say,
purpose comes
does
in.
this serve my purpose?
Yeah.
So you're sitting
Yeah.
there in the recliner at 10:30 at night
Yeah.
and say, does this serve my purpose?
Right.
No, I got stuff to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I got, for you, I got a beautiful woman lying in bed waiting.
Yeah.
Let's
Right.
move
That's
in
good.
the direction of my purpose instead,
Yeah.
Like I have things in place to chase after what God has spoken into my life.
That's good.
And so being able to, you're not going to say no. You're not going to flee from temptation if you don't have something to flee
That's
to
good.
also.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's powerful, man. Yeah, because sin is attractive. It feels good. Like you wouldn't pursue something. Sin leads to death. You don't attract it because it's ugly and disgusting.
Right.
Eventually it becomes that, right? But because there's an attraction level, man. So like, yeah, that's a really good point. Like you ground yourself in purpose.
Yeah.
And that takes maturity though. That takes some maturity because yeah, man, I've been married. It'll go on 6 years, July 27th, 2013. Right. So in the 5 years, it's like the maturity of it is like, I know God, what he's purposed for me. And every single day it requires daily decisions to stay faithful in that purpose. I'm not just talking about faithful in fidelity, but just faithful in the purpose that God's like faithful in being a husband that makes a woman feel special and loved and prized. And as the Bible says, you would give up your life for her as Christ gave up for the church, right? So like, yeah, man, that takes maturity though. And it doesn't always feel good.
No, it doesn't. It's that delayed gratification thing, right? Megan Good and what's her husband's name? You know what I'm talking about? Devon Franklin and Megan Good wrote a book called The Weight, and they tied that, like the whole first half of the book barely talked about celibacy at all.
Wow.
It mostly talked about delayed gratification, and then like the second half of the book was telling their story and saying,
Yeah.
so this is what it looks like when you're practicing celibacy.
Yeah.
And they also, the thing they pointed out, which I'd never thought about before, is there's a difference between abstinence and celibacy. The difference between abstinence and celibacy is abstinence is just like, don't do it. Celibacy is saying, no, I'm setting it aside for this purpose, right?
That's good.
So like, it's something I'm looking forward to.
Right.
It's something I'm going to take part in, and I'm not doing it yet until this happens, and it's a reward at the end of it. That is celibacy.
Yeah.
The other thing is they were talking about the idea of like whether or not it's honorable, and saying like there are two kinds of people who are quote unquote celibate.
Yeah.
There's the kind of people who have the opportunity to have sex and they say, no, I'm going to delay it. There's also the group of people who never really had a chance. They never really did the work. They never really had an opportunity to look him in the face, but they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get married as a virgin. Well, they also had never been alone with a girl. So like you never really, you never put yourself in a place where there was somebody that was like actually, so not to willingly put yourself into temptation, but to understand that there is like to having meaningful relationships and pursuing that godly, spouse and having those real conversations that you need to have, and then saying, okay, this is, we've decided this is where we want to go with this. Now let's get a ring. Let's do this right. And not right off into the sunset. We all know that's not real, but going, taking the next step. And then when you get there, you go out on your honeymoon and you say, all right, now what? Where do we go from here? Yeah. And say, you get, like you said, now what?
Yeah.
Now what? Yeah.
That's good. People can judge me, but I'll just be open a little bit here. This is where grace comes in, man. Like grace, because, my wife and I have opposite backgrounds growing up, and so the first time I got into church was 2007. 2008 really became like this year of like God started to settle in me conviction and here morally as a man, here's what like as you're pursuing a woman, right? And so I don't have a great example, right, as a father, right, or as a husband. So my background, I was exposed to sex at a young age, right? My background, as a man, we believe that you define your manliness by how many women you can sleep with. Yeah. And then when you get into the church, and I'm saying church not by building, but just like a group of people.
Right.
With
Yeah.
it. When you get into the church, you realize like, okay, I think that's wrong, but why? Right. And then the why I understood this with my pastor, man, my pastor and his wife, him and I had the same, it was like it was him. He was speaking to me. He had the same background. And then he preached a series and a sermon about this conviction. And he said, listen, I made a vow because God has spoke to me. I made a vow I'm going to commit to being celibate, set aside for my wife because it's what she deserves. And once God had touched him and reached him, right? Like, and this is what he was going to do. And then, so he committed, and I think I remember this to this day, 11 years since the time he stopped having sex when he was, before he was in the world living and doing the worldly things. And then the next time he had sex 11 years later was with his wife. And so that's where grace comes in, right? Because he wasn't a virgin in the sense of the matter, but God honored his vow and his commitment. And so his wife was a virgin though, right? So when I heard this, I'm like, okay, I don't have to condemn myself, right? I don't have to live in this, I messed up, I can't ever get it back, right? But rather like I can accept grace. And so when God spoke to me, man, this was interesting because like I was like, yeah, this is what I need to do. I need to commit to this. 2009 ended up being the next year, 2009. And so I committed to it. I wrote it down. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I know this is what I need to do. I'm going to find my wife. And then I wrote out this list of like essentials and non-essentials here. And I think I got it from that one book, right? Essentials are like, these are things I can't negotiate with the woman, right? Here are non-essentials. Here are things that, like I would desire. God, you know my heart. Like these are these are fleeting things, right? These are things that like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, but things that I know that I'm wired to like. And so I'm on this journey, right? And I'm in Phoenix when this happens, and I go back home to my hometown, Racine, and I got, the enemy knows my weakness, and I fell for it, right? Like, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but of the principalities and rulers of dark. And so the principalities knew like my struggle with relationships. So I got into this relationship, man, and I fell, and I fell on my promise of celibacy. When I got back to Phoenix, this was during a break of school, so I was teaching at the time, and I got back to Phoenix, and I was serving as an usher in my church, and my pastor we were in the back room. My pastor came up to me. He's like, "Hey, Stens, how are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm good," and I just said it like that, and he looked at me. He's like, "No, you're not," and I'm like, "That's interesting." I'm like, "What?" And he looked at me. He said, "How are you really doing? Like your relationships?" And then I didn't say anything, and he looked at me. He was like, "I promise you, I'm not even have a relationship with him like this, like in the terms of like telling us." He's like, "You had sex with somebody," and he said this because this was the Holy Spirit leading him, right? Like, and he called it out, and it was in love though. It was like, and I'm like, I didn't even argue against it. At this point, I'm like, I put my head down, and then he was like, "Listen," he's like, "I love you." He's like, you made a mistake. God loves you too. He's like, but here's what we're going to do for the next steps. And what he did right there was so much leadership and so much as a man, like I needed in my life, that I'm like, man. So the next 90 days of my life was just so powerful and instrumental. Like he called me out on this. And then so what ended up happening was, I sat out from being an usher, and I just took some time to reflect. And I'm like, man, I got it. That is God's grace. So in this of like, we know what God has destined for us and ordained for us. And the purpose of our lives isn't to live perfect. The Bible does say, be ye perfect. None of us are perfect. Jesus is perfect. And so in this is like, we recognize we mess up, but what do we do in response? How do we accept and receive his grace? And, Bishop T.D. Jakes said this. I think I like this. It's not necessarily doctrinal, but he's like, grace is the space to get it right. Because Paul talks about, I don't sin because I want to get away with it. Like, I do that which I don't want to do, right? But like grace is this space to get it right. Like you make a mistake, I love you, I forgive you, and we got to make this 180 change. So it was powerful for me because like when my wife and I, before we got married, we shared everything with each other, and I said, I just want to be honest with you. Like I want to share everything with you because there shouldn't be no secrets, and like this is what it is. And the grace is her accepting that. The grace is her realizing the testimony of what God did in my life, right? You know what I mean? And so I think like I'm going on for a while and I'll stop here, but I think like it's powerful to know like like in light of the discipline, in light of the purpose God has for us, in light of where he called us to, we're not going to be perfect. It's no excuse to not be perfect, but it's recognizing that his grace is sufficient, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think you hit on something there too when you said you shared everything with each other. So I don't remember who said it to me. It was probably my grandpa, but somebody at some point just said to me simply like, life is so much easier when you don't lie about anything. and I think his point in the moment was like, I probably had like forgotten a lie that I told, and it was like got caught in it or whatever. But the same thing is true, like just the way you live your daily life, right? And so especially when we get into the realms of like sexual sin, it's so easy to just be like hunker down and just hide all that darkness, right? And like sooner or later, something's gonna boil to the surface. Like whether it's just something going on inside of you, or whether that temptation starts coming back and nipping at your heels, or whatever it is. And if you haven't, like, there's no way. There's like your brothers can't have a thermometer on it if you don't tell them.
That's right.
Like if you don't tell your spouse, like now, like I've got some buddies that just like they get married and then their spouse finds out of something, and they say, you know, if I would have known, we would have never got married. Like, I don't think that's true, first of all. And second of all, like, what a terrible way to spend your first, 8 months of marriage.
Right.
You know? And so I think the best advice I've ever gotten is, as far as dating goes, was this idea of not necessarily like first 5 minutes of the first date, you know, but like within your, I like to play by the three date rule or 3 interaction rule. Okay. You know, unless it's just really obvious. But you know, 3 times, if you're interested, give it 3 times and then decide if it's something you're going to pursue any further. Right.
Yeah, that's good.
And so in that time, by the time that 3rd interaction is going on, you need to know like pretty much what they believe. You need to know what they believe as far as faith goes and religion. You need to know what they want out of life and what direction they're heading in. You need to know, you know, like what their financial situation looks like, even if it's not like, you know, in depth, like I know exactly how much you make and how much debt you have and all that. And frankly, I probably don't want to share it's completely on my end either, but like have a general idea, you know, and then like on the last one, to be able to have shared, you know, my own vulnerability and say like, hey, this is stuff I've struggled with, and then have that come back. And so a lot of times, you know, when you have that conversation, Frank, there's just not a lot of 26-year-old men who are virgins, right? And there's definitely not a lot of 26-year-old men who have kind of been able to live some of the life experiences I've lived that come out of that virgin, you know? But that doesn't mean that there's no sexual sin there, right? Like I've struggled with porn, I've struggled with all the things that go with it and all that. And so having that conversation, almost every time, the first thing she says is, well, I didn't expect you to be so vulnerable. And then the second thing is unfortunately, it's like, well, I didn't, you know, since you said that, I want to share. And, you know, and then they open up about, you know, their own sexual activity. And, like most of the time it's like, so we're both in a place now where we're living the way God wants us to live, right? Or at least to the best of our ability. But also understanding like on both sides, like, I don't want to be surprised either. And she doesn't want to be. I kind of lost my train of thought here, but you know where I'm going with this. Is that vulnerability, that openness, and that's key. And the same thing with, you know, the guys that we have relationships. It has to be the same way too. So here's a question for you: how do guys make the cut? You know what I'm saying? So like not to be bragging on myself, but I have a fair number of guys who want more access and don't get it. And then there's a fair number of guys who I want more access to them and I don't get it, right? For various reasons. Who makes the team, right? Who makes the cut for you?
Yeah. With like these are my brothers that I shared.
Right, yeah. Like I kind of think about like ripples in a pond, you know? You've got that basketball team that suits up with you. Right? You got those 3, 4, 5 guys that are close. And then you got, you know, the next ring out where you know what's going on in each other's lives, but you don't necessarily, like, you're not intimate on like all the little things that are going on in life. And then you got a lot of friends, you know, on the outside. So who makes the cut? Who gets in the circle?
You know, I'm not good to answer this, but because here's it, and I'll do my best. I have tons of acquaintances. Tons. Because it's just my personality where like I struggle to go deep with people and develop strong relationships, right? So it's hard, right? Like who makes the cut? I think because the cut is like you're somebody who you can be vulnerable with.
Yeah.
You're somebody who can share like what you just shared, right? Like I struggle with this, and this. So I don't. For me, and I think like every man has to wrestle with this because I think it's essential. It's what we started this conversation with. Like, how do you get to a place where like you're able to open up, right, and walk as man? So I think because so essential, right? But like I think for me, I'll answer this is like I'll say that I think like for me one of the most important things is like this connection or relatability, you know? Because I'm thinking about my few, and my few are like 3.
Yeah.
I think about, and even those 3, there's a limitation within each, but like the 3, there's a connection there that they understand.
Yeah.
Where I've been and who I am and where I'm going, you know? That's important, man. You know, and conversations are built, or relationships are built rather conversation at a time, but like then there's a certain level of like you can build relationships and deepen them. But then when you meet somebody, like, you know, like on a deep level, like they understand where I'm at because they've either experienced what I've gone through or similar, you know? So that's important because everyone that I can think of, all 3 of them, I think about the life that they lived. I think about where they're at. They're all married. One unfortunately just got divorced, you know? But we're at the same place in life, and we also experience same things, and we share like similar things. I don't think that's necessarily, that may not be for everybody, right? Like that may not be a requirement for everybody, but for me, that's huge, right? And I think about like I think about like with that, like comes a myriad of things. Like I can't be close with somebody who's, and not because I don't want to or because I think I'm above them, but somebody who has a different faith.
Right. Agreed.
Like
Agreed.
You have to, right? You know, if you're Buddhist, I'm going to love you, but like we're only going to go so far.
Right. Exactly.
How you pour into me, you know? And there's nothing against Buddhists. It's the first thing that came to my mind. So there has to be this faith, right? Like you have to be on this path and this journey. Not that you're perfect, because we're not. That's the whole reason why we're brothers, right? But like that, like you believe what I believe because this is the truth of life. That's huge. You know, and I think somebody like all 3 of them are not afraid and not shy to give it to me raw.
Yeah.
You know, that's huge. And you think about it with anybody, like if you really love somebody and care for somebody, you will be honest and be real with them.
Yeah.
You know, for somebody who's a stranger, it's like, you know, the good Samaritan thing to do is like let them know, like, hey, you know, like, watch out before you trip over when you're walking down the aisle. Right. But like the thing about it is like you're not gonna go out your way more than likely, like
right.
For somebody but somebody you care about, like you're gonna have the hard conversation. You're gonna give the thing that like most people won't do, the difficult thing, because that's important for it. So I think people, I don't know what comes first, like the relationship or like you just being really open and honest and transparent, but that's huge. That's got to be huge because like you make the cut. If like, don't just say yes to everything I do. Don't just be like, everything you do is great. Like I need you to tell me like what sucks. I need you to tell me like about me. That's huge. And then I think somebody, so like faith, right? Like transparency and like honesty and just a level of directness. You know, and I think I always like doing 3s, right? So I'll take a third one. I think if I think about all 3 of them, I think about their like level of, I'll use the word success here too, right? Because like when you think about leadership, it's like it's really hard to take somebody where you haven't been. And so I think that's important in a relationship with men that build you up. How successful are they? I think that's huge, man. Like, yeah. And so in the way that we have a mentor that's above us in that sense, but we should have a mentee below us in that sense, so we can bring somebody up. But I think that's so important with like, they can, because now they can speak. So There's somebody who can relate to you. There's somebody who can speak directly to you. But there's somebody also who can share exactly what you've been through.
Yeah.
So I think those really resonate with me of like, that's who makes the cut.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like that. And not necessarily like worldly success either, you know?
Right.
Success
Exactly.
in like what do they have that to be just totally raw on it? Like what do they have that I want? You know? And I think about, you know, my two closest guys, you know, one of them is like the doctrinal guy, you know,
You
like
need that.
he'll
You need
quote
that.
you like these different theologians on on this topic, and he's got like, if I'll say like there's this Bible passage that says, and he goes, oh yeah, that one, it's you know, this, and here's what it is in the original Greek and Hebrew and blah blah blah,
Love
and you just
that.
go like, whoa, you know.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you know, the guy he's always been a little bit stronger. Like he's always been just a little bit, never been better looking, but just a little bit better dressed. You know, like he got the kind of girl that I want to end up with. You know, like that kind of guy who just always just somehow finds a way to be a little bit better than me at everything. You know, it's like good. So I'm always chasing him.
Right.
And like, that's exactly what I need, right?
Right.
And then like as guys come in, if I'm not reaching up for them,
Right.
like. They're not gonna make it right in, right? And at the same time, understanding that I have to provide value to them too.
Exactly.
Yeah, it can't be a one-way thing.
No, it can't be, man. Because I think that's where what I may struggle with, you may struggle with, right? But you also may have victory in where you can speak to me, and where you struggle with, I may have victory and I can speak to you. An analogy quickly to explain this is like, you shouldn't live and hang out where you fell.
Yeah.
So like if I was addicted to like, you know, heroin, I don't know why that came to my mind. But I shouldn't have men in my life who are just heroin addicts.
Right.
Not that you can't minister to them, right? I'm not saying that you can mentor them, but like people who speak life into you, man, like you gotta have somebody who like they can't really live where you fell in, right? To a certain extent, because that's where the relatability, connectability comes in. Like you understand where I went through, but there's got to be victory, man. Like you have to have victory. That's where the success, quote unquote, success is. And when I say success, right, like how faithful we've been with what God's given us. Yeah. That success. There's got to be victory in that, so that way people can speak to us and we can speak to them. You know,
because that's back to boundaries again. You know, who gets access? Who gets
that's
access?
Right. Yeah. Time is so important. You know, time is so important because like I feel like. Right now, my role, my title is principal director. So I usually don't often say the title because what does that mean? Essentially, I support and manage principals. One of the key ideas we talk about when I talk with principals is the first thing that we always discuss is like how your success is dependent on how you spend your time. Not necessarily like so not. Because like everybody has 40 hours in a day, right? Or 24 hours in a day, right? Sorry, not 40. So how you spend that time is going to really dictate your success, right? So like for me, when we think about like pouring into each other, like you have to have boundaries and limitations of who do you pour into, who do you let pour into, because you have a limited amount of time, like, and like that's that time that you value, like you can't freely, it has to be purposeful, man, how you spend it, you know? And in the same way, like a principal successful is like, so many things can pull them away from the core work that they do, which is supporting teachers, which is making sure culture and instruction. But if you like constantly put out fire, those are essential at certain points. So you have to build in time for that. But if you're constantly doing only those things, you're going to fail at your core job. So how you spend your time. So I think the time spent, man, that's why for me, that question is so important, because it's like you have to have you have to have a few that make the cut. Because you can't pour into everybody. Everybody can't pour into you. You have to be so intentional about how you select and spend your time with people. All
right. So as we finish up here, the question I got to ask every guest is, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a man? / you know, what makes a Christian man?
We're coming to an end, huh?
Well, we only have so much audio we can put. We can roll again after this is over. We can only make one episode so long before it is too long.
This is good. So what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah, what does it mean to be a man?
Wow, I wasn't ready for this question.
I usually prep people on it. I didn't prep you.
It's all good. What does it mean to be a man? It's speaking truth in the chaos. Let me explain. When Adam was created. God gave this crazy responsibility and asked him to name every creature, an animal, living being, right? So he said, essentially, like, speak truth, what they are, who they are, into chaos. And the chaos here is like, there's no identity. So Adam named, and so it was zebra, lion, right? Like, you can go on, monkey. So men speak truth into chaos. And when you think about like the value of a man in a relationship with a woman, the truth into chaos is, I love you because you mean so much to me, because the woman that you are, because the truth of this is like when the Bible talks about, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and life. The truth, or in other words, Jesus here is like, you sacrifice your life, because Jesus said, love your wives like the church. And what I do with the church? I died for her, right? So for me, like, that's as a man, right? Like, as a father, when you have kids, you speak truth into them, right? You tell them, you affirm your young men, you're strong. God's created you for a purpose. You're loved to your daughters, right? Like, you're beautiful. What you're valuable, what you have to offer. Like, don't let any man take that away from, right? Like, there's so many, and then, so you speak truth in the chaos, right? Like, and like, when you don't do that, you think about the repercussions. Single home, right? Like, you think about what could happen. You think about what sin could creep up because of it. And if you don't speak truth in the chaos with a woman, you think about like the inevitable relationship that will create, like a woman who will leave, or like infidelity, right? Like, you think about, like, as men, like, we are, that's what defines a man. Like, God's positioned us to speak truth in the chaos. When he called us to be leaders of the household, it's not because we have all the right answers, but it's rather like God's given us this position to define direction. We get input. We get like, there's this, women have this intuition that we don't have, right? But like, there's this, we speak truth in the chaos, right? That for me is masculinity. Not in the sense of like rough and tumble, just rough and tumble, right? But it's also rough and tumble, and it's also sensitive. Like, you speak truth, you speak the truth in the chaos, and that for me is the man.
That's awesome. And to add some more to that, if you look at the Genesis account, and I just looked this up while you were talking, because it just like the light bulb went off. Someday when I write a book, in a couple of weeks when I write a book, this is going to go in there, because this is awesome. Thank you. Anyway, so Adam, if you look at the Genesis account, Adam names Eve twice. He names her when he first meets her. So the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She will be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Wow. And that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. So he names her there. Yeah. He gives her purpose and identity. He says, we are now together. Right. We are one flesh. That's right? And so that defines their relationship with each other. Yeah. And then at the end of the account, after they're fallen to sin, then Adam names her again. And he names her. So chaos has broken out. Right. Like, it is ultimate chaos. They know they're going to die. Mm-hmm. And like, to conject on a little bit, they likely don't know when. Right. They don't know anything. They don't have any kids yet. Yeah. So like, all this crazy, like, so much, there is no known besides that they have lost heavenly bliss. Like, I think that's the worst that's a worse existence than we can, because we get like moments of bliss, right? Yeah. Like, you get, whether you want to talk about like physical relationships or just like moments of laughter, or like earthly bliss, we get like snapshots, little tiny seconds of heaven. Right. They lived in Eden and then lost it. Yep. And you go like, now what, right? And so Adam names Eve that in takes that chaos and in that names her Eve, because she will be the mother of all people. That's good, man. Like, isn't that good? Takes this chaos and says, nope, this is our purpose and our direction. Yeah. God has given us a mission. This is our purpose and our direction. Here's the role you're going to play in it. Yeah, that's good. So just to add to your thing there.
Think about it as men too. Like, as a young man, what I need from my father is I need him to speak truth in the chaos. I need him to affirm me that, like, you are good enough. You are strong enough. You are the potential that you have is more than what you think or ask, right? Like, you are, as your case, like a manly man, a king. It's just like God's designed us that way, you know? Like, we speak truth in the chaos. It just makes sense, man. For me, I think that's huge for a man. Like, your goal is to speak truth in the chaos, and the truth is always aligned to what the word says. Always.
All right. Thank you, Castenzio. You rock, man. I'm glad you're with us.
Man, thanks for having me.
This thing, I can't wait for people to hear this. This is going to be good. If somebody hears what you're talking about, wants to get in touch with you, or wants to know more about your schools, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm an open book, man. I like to be like a glass house, right? Like, there aren't any secrets. There's always secrets. But you can always call me, contact me. So I think the best thing is cell phone. You can call me. I'll give my cell phone number. It's 262-412-9977. 262-412-9977. And then you can always email me, but I have long first name and last name. So call me, text me. That's totally fine. Get in contact me that way. Otherwise, I'm on social media. Usually I use Instagram as my main source here.
Sweet. Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Glad we had you. Thanks for being here.
I'm so glad to be here, man. Thank you for the work that you do, Charlie.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Gird Up Podcast. If you like what you're hearing on our podcast, make sure you're sharing it with friends and family, men in your life who you think need to hear our message. You can find us on social media, on Facebook under the Gird Up Podcast, and there's a Gird Up community as well there where you can interact with other men on the journey toward Christian manhood. You can find us on Instagram as girdup_like_a_man. If you'd like to help us bring our message to more men just like you all around the world, you can hit up our Patreon account. Type in www.patreon.com/girdup. And finally, please leave a 5-star rating or review on whatever platform you use to listen to our podcast, whether it's iTunes or Spotify. What that does is it helps us get more attention in the podcast world and bring more men to our message. Thank you again for listening to our podcast. Thank you for all the ways you support us and help spread the word. Until next time, go gird up and be the man that God created you to be.